So as you may or may not know, right, we're now rapidly approaching May, and the traditional March Madness fiasco and excitement has gone past. And so we try to do something a little bit different here at Summit 7, and we decided to create the Conquer Your Bracket Challenge. So the webinar is really just going to be about how we did it, right? One of the things that we oftentimes as an SI, systems integrator with Microsoft, people are always asking us how we did certain things. And so, we made this contest available in public, and so we wanted to be able to show everybody, what we did, sort of the thoughts behind it, how it materialized, and then we're also going to be going through a demo to actually go through some of the code and elements that went in, to making the magic happen with the form. And so, currently speaking, this is Jason Batchelor. I'm a vice president here at Summit 7 Systems, and I've been working with SharePoint and Nintex for almost 10 years now. So it's probably been a little bit longer than that, but after a decade, I quit counting. And I'll let Patrick introduce himself.
Hey, this is Patrick Abel. I'm a software developer here with Summit 7.
So Patrick was really the brains behind making this thing happen. So, just real quick, if you're not familiar with who we are as a company, we are a Microsoft Gold partner. We're a systems integrator, and we've been recognized in the industry, not just in thought leadership, but just as far as our technical expertise. And so you can see we've been recognized by KM World as one of the top 100 companies that matter in knowledge management, the CRN Next Gen 250 with innovation, and we've got Ben Curry. I'm sure most of you have heard of him, our Microsoft MVP. And we've also, have the distinct recognition of being on the Inc. 5000, and we've been on the Inc. 5000 for 2 years, and we're on the Inc. 500 prior to that. And we're also privileged to be a service-disabled veteran-owned small business. So we're partnered up with Nintex, and if you're not familiar with what Nintex offers and what they provide, they're actually one of the world's leading software companies when it comes to workflow, modernizing apps, and being able to automate things. A lot of what they're doing right now is built on top of the SharePoint platform and the Office 365 platform as well. But they really provided us the flexibility and agility needed. And as partners, we have a lot of experience with them, and we've always had great success. And so you can see that they're widely used. They have a high adoption rate, and the repeat usage for their solutions is one of the top in the industry. So the birth of the idea really came about, the fact that we knew we could do just about anything with Nintex, especially on the form side. There's a lot of things you can do as far as anonymous forms and being able to hide out, certain text fields and password protect things. There's just a lot of things that you could do, but we realized that we wanted to make something a little bit more fun. We've got these traditional business technologies, and we knew that there was just something else that we could do. So why did we decide to build a bracket? Well, the biggest thing, is that it's the ultimate form, and it's also a great use case, and the entire life cycle that goes into it, from the dynamic ability to pick teams, to managing the entire process of the scoring and all of those things, and then trying to provide people the visibility into it. And honestly, we're always trying to come up with new ideas and fun things to work on, and this was just a great fit for us. So, just like anything else, and with any idea, there are always going to be some challenges. Some people call them opportunities, but for us, they were challenges, and we were able to make them opportunities for us to excel. So our first challenge really was time. The biggest challenge that we had and realized was that, time wasn't on our side. Our original idea occurred at the end of January, early February. And so what happened, we were sitting around, like most, innovative conversations do, trying to figure out what else we could do. And we had the idea of, wouldn't it be cool to build out our own bracket? Our Bracketology solution is what we called it. So that concept really came about at the end of January. And we had a few conversations, here and there, and then really kind of the catalytic point for us was the the ability for Matt and I, Matt Whitehorn, who runs our services group here and is also very heavy into the Nintex platform, we both had the opportunity to speak at Nintex's annual event, the InspireX conference. It was their inaugural event that was held back in February. So we left InspireX obviously very inspired, and we realized that we wanted to be able to do something and actually take this idea and put it in place. Well, by the time we got back and we started really looking at the resources and our time frame, we really only had about 2.5 weeks because we had Selection Sunday, right, March 14th, that was coming up. The second challenge was knowledge. Now, this one's interesting because it's not really about the knowledge of the tools, because we know SharePoint and we know Nintex, but it was really trying to understand, the pieces and parts that make up the actual workflow, that make up the form. What is it that's running behind the scenes to make a bracketology solution work? So, the biggest thing that, obviously, because we wanted to make this a contest, we wanted to put it out there and make it available for people, was the recognition and realization that, there were the rules, and how were we going to make sure that that we were not doing anything that we shouldn't be? Because, if you may or may not know, March Madness, the term itself is actually copyrighted. And, use of the NCAA men's tournament, a lot of those things, because they are copyrighted, we do have the need to make sure that, we can come up with something a little bit unique. And so that's how we came up with the Conquer Your Bracket approach. The other thing was to really understand, a lot of us have filled out the brackets. We've gone through and we've made these things, we've printed them off, we stuck them to our cubes in our offices and emailed them around. But truly looking at it from how the users are going to interact with it was a little bit different. We do a lot of UX here and a lot of forums and things like that, but looking at it from a consumer side was just a little bit different perspective. We also wanted to make it repeatable and reusable. Obviously, this is going to be something that we're going to continue doing and continuing to innovate on, but we really wanted to make sure that once we were done with it, how could we reuse what we've done? And if we were to put it out, how could other people reuse it? So then the third challenge was resources. So we're a services company, and so we work our best to keep all of our employees actively working on customer-facing projects. Now, where this becomes a challenge is because we do have all of these projects going on, and our employees, we understand there is a need for a work-life balance, that we've had project commitments, family commitments, things that are going on in our everyday life, and we still only had 2.5 weeks. So when you try to bring all of those things together, it's really, in our opinion, we're really happy with the progress that we're able to make, because when people ask us, what can you do with Nintex and the complexities that you can be able to build out, this is a really good example of something where we were able to take our resources and to some degree on a part-time basis to really start innovating and building this thing out. Now, I will tell you, just to be completely transparent, the last 3 or 4 days, we were pretty heads down with it, testing it and running it through a variety of scenarios. But for a large portion of the 2.5 weeks, we weren't really working on it full time. It was all evening hours and just, lunch and learns and coffee sessions. So our process. So if we started out with the bracket, we really had to start decomposing it into specific areas. And so when we started breaking it out, we really needed to understand the data model, because that was going to really impact, could we replicate the needs inside of SharePoint? Could we, build out the relationships between multiple lists? How are we going to track user scores, the user IDs, the actual brackets themselves, and being able to store, the PDF or Word document so that they could be emailed out to anybody who was participating. So we really needed to make sure that the data model was taken care of. After that, we already had to get into the requirements. We had a pretty accelerated time frame, so getting into the technical process, the self-imposed requirements, we knew that we wanted to make it work with SharePoint, Nintex Forms, Nintex Workflow. We wanted to do some of the, the document, conversion, being able to move, from a certain file type into another, and we also want to be able to tie it in with Power BI for some of the reporting. So we had, to some degree, what I would say would be a hackathon. We said these are the tools that we want to use, and we're going to see how we can make this solution match up with that. And then from there, It was a lot of short, quick sprints. Build, test, review, innovate, design, and we went through those cycles over and over and over. And it was one of probably the biggest keys for the success. So when we start thinking about the requirements, we look at the bracket, we broke them up into 3 major categories. And then from there, when we start looking at the form itself, we knew that we needed the form to be opened up to anybody. We wanted everybody with essentially an internet, mobile device, anything that where they could submit a form, we wanted to give them the ability to do that. And we also needed dynamic pick lists. We needed to be able to update the bracket within a very short amount of time so that the brackets were reflective of the current seating. We also needed the form to be mobile friendly. People are using a variety of devices, and so we needed the form to be responsive enough to where if they were using an iPad or a cell phone, that they could make these picks and it would work accurately. We also wanted to make sure that the form wasn't just electronic, that it was going to be a printable copy provided to them. So the ability to build out a form, for a web-based interface or mobile interface is a lot different than the way you're going to have it show for a printable copy. The interaction is going to be just a little bit different. So then from there, we started looking at the process. Once we received those anonymous form submissions, how are we going to track the results? We knew that we needed a scoring mechanism, and we had to be able to handle document conversion. And then we started focusing on what the user needs were. These were very high level. We only had 2.5 weeks, so we started at the top, we broke it down to these basic pieces, and we started identifying, what is it that people needed. So we knew that we really didn't want to keep bothering people with a bunch of email. So we didn't want to constantly be emailing them additional scoring updates and where they were sitting in the standings. We wanted to make it almost a self-service approach by having the Power BI portal available. We also didn't want to have to, deal with maintaining usernames and passwords. So that's why we were just only kept it very simple. You create a username, it was a unique identifier, and everybody could check and look for their own username to see where their standings were. We also knew that, as we've said before, users wanted to be able to print and share their brackets. Print to PDF was a big thing. And then social sharing. Once you've completed your bracket, we wanted to enable any users to share that back out. So they understood the whole push to share is such people take it for granted that at the end of it, we really wanted to make sure that we were trying to address all of the basic needs that a user would need for the bracket, start to finish. So the design, if we go back to that bracket, really what we did was we had 4 key areas. We had the Nintex workflow, where we use for the score calculations, the email confirmations, and emailing those PDF brackets. It's also, the workflow would handle the document conversion. It's a specific action that we can use with Nintex. It's technology they have built in so that we can convert a Word document directly into that PDF, and then actually use the workflow to provide that PDF back out to the end user. Nintex forms. It was the anonymous forms capability was very powerful. It was very quick. It was very easy. We could create the form, test it in-house, then publish it out with a tiny URL. And then Power BI, that's exactly how we wanted to handle the results tracking, the results summary, and do some tick analytics. What is it that people have done before? And be able to take historical data just to give people an insight as to what was happening with all of the information. So at a high level, this is kind of what the architecture really looked like. We had the form that was going to be entered in on whatever device it needed to be entered from, and that was going to be captured within a Nintex anonymous cloud-based form. So Nintex has this technology called Nintex Live, and it sits out in the cloud, and it actually handles the transactions as far as bringing that information in and bringing it into our own internal SharePoint farm. And it would bring that information in, and it would write that information using the Nintex forms and write that information into the lists themselves. And that list information is what was being used to actually populate the bracket. So if you're familiar with SharePoint and use of lists, right, you can imagine that we would have a lot of columns to capture all of the winners and all of the picks. But we wanted to create that bracket. And that's how we ended up using it, was to be able to take Nintex, use the document conversion, and write the metadata out of SharePoint, those list columns, and bringing that information directly into a file. And then from there, we wanted to be able to convert the bracket to PDF and email it to the actual end user. And those two pieces there are happening all via workflow. Now, the way we handled the scoring was pretty simplistic, to be honest. There were a lot of different ways we looked at automating it, but with the 2.5 weeks, we really had to go with the best and most surefire way of getting the scoring taken care of. So we gave the administrator of the Conquer Your Bracket Challenge, the Bracketology solution, gave them the ability to update the scores as they were coming in. Once those scores were being updated, it would trigger a workflow and it actually run a new calculation and create a data set for Power BI to reference, and those data sets would be updated after all of the games. So that, at a high level, is exactly how the architecture was laid out. It wasn't too complicated, mostly because we were able to leverage a lot of the Nintex capabilities, directly with what we were doing. So the other thing to point out is that, from our perspective, we looked at Nintex as an open-ended platform. It really gave us the ability, when we talk about flexibility and agility, to make use of the features and functions that they have out of the box, and to bring our own sense of knowledge directly into the tool. So we really viewed as Nintex and SharePoint combined as an entire platform for us to work with, combining that with Office 365 and Power BI. So that's why we started using the jQuery aspect, because there were some customizations that we needed to make to the forms to create the interactions that we needed. So at this point, I'm going to hand presentation mode over to Patrick Abel, and he is going to walk you through sort of the magic behind the scenes.
All right. I requested presenter. Can you see my screen? All right. This is Patrick. I'm now going to dive a little deeper, transitioning from design challenges into more technical challenges as far as the integration of forms and really producing some of the custom pieces for things like cascading dropdowns. So we can start with looking at the form. I'm not sure if you had a chance to submit a bracket or not, but if not, we can take a look here. So this is the Conquer Your Bracket form, if you haven't seen it. We start with a tab that allows you to submit user information, comply with rules that we might need as far as getting some information from our users that are actually submitting. And then you can see as you dive into each tab, we've broken that one sheet that you might see on a printable bracket into different regions, where you can come into the Midwest region, look at who's playing in the first round, and then make a selection. And really the first technical hurdle to overcome with this is the cascading dropdowns. So as you can see, we pick based on these two labels, Texas Tech and Butler here in the second round. We pick Butler, and then you notice as we work across, the choice controls are dynamically being updated based on the selections that you make. So if we were to come down a little further, pick a few additional teams, you notice Purdue and Iowa State from the prior round are available, and we keep working our way across. So really the first aspect from a technical perspective was building a prototype of that cascading drop-down piece. So if we jump over to the code briefly, this is in designer mode for the Nintex form. If we take a look, this first panel that I have is for the Midwest region, and let me go over here. The control we were just looking at is right here, this choice control. So a couple of things to point out here is we are setting up CSS classes. This indicator is what's allowing us to hook into from the JavaScript to be able to manipulate those elements as we need to. And if we jump into the code, what's actually happening is when the document loads, if we jump in, If we jump into our settings here, you'll notice we've got custom CSS and custom JavaScript in external files. So that's what I'm showing here, these two files. And you'll notice on document load, we are calling this dropdowns.set initial choice controls. These are for all our initial rounds, round 2, so those first games that are played. And likewise, as we cascade down, we're setting these dynamic choice controls. So for each of these, that class that I showed, we've got an ID associated with each of those, our naming convention for knowing which ones are which. And then we call these functions that are actually building up that dynamic aspect. So if we go look at this function, here is that set dynamic choice control function. You notice that it takes a couple of parameters. It takes a drop-down 1, 2, and 3. 1 and 2 are the selections that you make in the prior round, and then 3 is actually what you're manipulating with the function. So we use that class with this variable to pull it in via code, and then we're attaching a change event handler to each of those pieces such that we can pull that into an array, and then down here below, iterating through that array and appending options to that subsequent choice control based on what was picked. So that's really the logic behind those dynamic cascading dropdowns. So that's how each of those work. Really, the next piece, once that piece is solved, is scalability, is growing that to a form as big as the NCAA bracket is. So taking that proof of concept, taking a single region and an isolated couple of controls, and then growing into multiple regions, 68 teams and 67 games to be played was really the next challenge. So to overcome that, if we jump back into the form, the way we overcame that is with tabs. So you notice from setup to play-in games to each of the different regions and then into the finals, we've divided our form up into a tab-based layout so that entry is a little more straightforward as far as picks. You don't have to scroll horizontally, and it made mobile entry a lot easier. So if we show that real quick, if we jump back into Form Designer, you'll notice that each of these regions, I'm in the Midwest region now. If I scroll down farther, I've got another panel that's for this West region. But each of these has a rule applied. So on this West panel, what we're doing is we are looking and saying, if my tab control is not set to West, then hide this panel. If we jump up to Midwest, it's very similar, the rules. So with this one, if I'm not set to Midwest for the tab control, hide this panel, and likewise for all of these controls. So if we jump up to the choice control, which is that tab control, this is actually a choice control configured as radio buttons. You can see the display format as option buttons here. And we've got choices for each of these tabs, setup, play-in, Midwest, and so on. The key here is that we've got a class set up as tab control. So this CSS class is what allows us to style those that choice control to have that tabbed look and feel. To call out one other important piece is if you look in advanced, you also control the control mode. So this piece needs to be edit. If it weren't in edit, then depending on the mode you come into the form, that control may not be clickable. So that's an important piece on the configuration of that too. All right, so if we jump back into the code, I can show you what's kind of driving that behind the scenes. You notice that we had an external CSS file, and so we've got a collection of CSS classes here that are all based off that tab control class. So this is what allows us to easily administer and configure that choice control, and then use styles to make it look the way we might want it to look, extending the out-of-the-box functionality. So we float the tabs left, we applied background styling, borders, alignment, that type of thing. You notice that we set display to none for the radio property of the tab control. That's what does away with the traditional radio buttons that you normally see on that choice control. And then we're looking at the checked property of those radio buttons so that we can style the active tab different than the other tabs, so you know which tab you're currently on. So that's really the layout aspect. Really the other piece, and perhaps the most important piece, is saving. We actually found several similar solutions out there where people had done prototypes of dynamic drop-downs, cascading drop-downs, and the overarching theme that we saw was that very few were built in such a way where the data could actually be captured, couldn't be saved. And so what you would see is what you might expect for this drop-down here in the Midwest region is you might expect that we would connect this choice control to the column for the data to be stored, and that's what would store the data behind the scenes in a list. However, these are not connected, and the reason they're not is because if you were to do this and save, you would run into an invalid view state issue. What it is since we're using JavaScript on the client side to dynamically alter the options that are available in those dropdowns, you invalidate the view state on the code behind. So instead, as far as a workaround, these are not connected. Instead, for each dropdown that we have a corresponding text box. These text boxes are hidden using CSS, but we have them with a CSS class, very similar. I'm sorry, a JavaScript client ID, very similar to the boxes that they are associated with. And so this is really a two-step workaround to be able to capture this data. So a user fills out all the drop-downs, and what happens is the drop-downs have to be disabled, and then the contents of those drop-downs have to be pushed into these text boxes so that the text boxes can actually be saved. And if you were to look in the settings of this text box, you'll notice that this is what's actually connected to our SharePoint list on the back end that's going to ultimately capture the data and score it. So if we jump back into the JavaScript file, and I can't close it. There we go. If we jump back into the JavaScript file, you notice we've got a function here called buttons.onSave, and this function is configured on the actual submission of the form. So when the submit form is called, we're calling two functions, the first of which disables all. So if we come down here and look at disable all, you notice that disable all is looking for all DOM objects of game selection, and then it is taking the property of disable and setting it to true. So every one of those drop downs has a class of game selection, and then all of them are being disabled. Likewise, we're calling a function, if I can find it, of populate text boxes. And populate text boxes looks at every one of our game selections, all 67 of them, and calls populate text box. If we go look at populate text box, you can say it's working very similar in that it's pulling into a variable the object for the label that's passed in. So that label we just saw as that JavaScript client ID is being pulled in, and then we are setting the corresponding, we are setting the text box value based on the option that's selected for the dropdown. So that's kind of our process for getting values from the dropdowns that would invalidate the view state into text boxes that can be stored in a compliant way to the SharePoint list, and then disabling so that the save can complete successfully. So really that's the last piece, really as far as technical hurdles go.
Thanks, Patrick. So let me switch back over real quick. I had to reclaim the presenter mode from him. Sorry about that. So I hope that it really answers everybody's questions as far as how we were dealing with the form. The biggest thing was to break it down into these smaller chunks to make it workable and be able to as Patrick was saying, be able to handle information as we were trying to save it, because it was a continual barrier that we were running into. But there were a lot of times where information does need to be stored right there when we were working with things. And so we also see a lot of applications for this with other types of forms. So, just real quick, if you do have more information, what we have on our website, we have a Nintex dictionary, is what we call it. And so that's actually a full searchable index of all the actions and configuration options available for Nintex workflows. So it's got all the definitions. It's got pictures of icons. So if you're not familiar with all the pieces and elements that you can work with Nintex, check it out. It's on our website. We'll also be posting a recorded version of the webinar out there, so that way if other people want to see it and they weren't able to participate in this, then we're going to put it out there, and so people can download it and take a look. So we hope everybody has enjoyed this and that there was some knowledge gained and that it was worth your time, and we appreciate you participating. If you have any questions, the chat menu is up at the top, and we'll pause for a couple of minutes to see if anybody had any specific questions. So one of the questions we got was, is this available for Office 365? So I know that the original solution that we put out was actually, that we built internally, was all built on Office 365. To bring it over to enable the anonymous forms capability is why we decided to bring it into the on-prem so that we could just set up the Nintex Live connection. So that was the primary driver for that. And then we also wanted to honestly be able to pass information back and forth between on-premise and Office 365, so we had a full integration between both of those. The way we handled that was, we've got the ADFS and sync and all the other pieces going on so that we have that working together. So I hope that answers that question. Does anybody else have any other questions? All right. Well, we appreciate everybody's time, and glad we were able to hopefully pass some of the knowledge along in shorter than a 1 hour webinar, so you get some of your day back, and we appreciate everybody participating. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us, jason.batchelor@summit7systems.com, or you can hit patrick.abel@summit7systems.com, and as always, you can hit just email in at info@summit7systems.com as well. So thank you everybody we thank you for your time, and thanks for participating.